The lawyer's voice droned on about assets and beneficiaries while my stepsisters counted their millions on manicured fingers. $15 million, divided between the two of them. The estate in the Hamptons, the yacht, the art collection, everything my father had built over 40 years of sacrifice and sleepless nights. And me? I sat in the corner of that mahogany-paneled office, holding a snow globe so cheap the plastic seam was visible, watching fake snow swirl around a miniature cottage that looked nothing like any place we'd ever lived. They didn't even try to hide their smirks. But here's what they didn't know, what nobody in that room could have guessed. That tacky little snow globe my father left me? It wasn't just his final insult. It was the key to something that would make their $15 million look like pocket change. If you've ever been the one everyone counts out, the one who gets the scraps while watching others feast on what should have been yours, then you need to hear what happened next. Because sometimes the smallest gifts hold the biggest secrets. My name is Sophia, and until 6 months ago, I was the invisible daughter. Not by choice, but by careful design. When my mother died giving birth to me, my father remarried within a year. Victoria came with 2 daughters of her own, Cassandra and Bianca, both blonde, both beautiful, in that sharp, calculated way that photographs well, but feels cold in person. I was 3 years younger than Bianca, 5 years younger than Cassandra, and from the moment they moved into our house, I became the ghost haunting their perfect family portrait. My father, Richard Winters, built his fortune from nothing. He'd started with a single food truck, selling sandwiches to construction workers, and turned it into a chain of high-end restaurants that eventually became the Winters Hospitality Group. By the time I was 10, we lived in a mansion overlooking the Hudson River, complete with staff, a pool house, and enough rooms that I could go days without running into my stepfamily if I tried hard enough. And believe me, I tried. The hierarchy in our house was established early and reinforced daily. Victoria ruled with the kind of subtle cruelty that never left visible bruises, but scarred just the same. At dinner parties, she'd introduce Cassandra and Bianca as Richard's daughters, while I was also here somewhere. When business associates came over, my stepsisters were paraded around in designer dresses while I was sent to my room because Victoria said my presence confused the narrative. Even my father seemed to forget I existed unless Victoria reminded him, usually to point out some perceived failing. "Sophia broke a glass in the kitchen," she'd say, even though Bianca had thrown it against the wall in a tantrum. "Sophia's grades are slipping," she'd lie, while hiding my report cards that showed straight A's. "Sophia's being difficult again," became her favorite refrain, usually when I'd done nothing more than exist in a common area of my own home. My father would look at me with tired disappointment, too exhausted from building his empire to investigate the truth. "Try to get along, Sophie," he'd say, using the nickname only he called me. "Family is everything." But I wasn't family. I was an inconvenience, a reminder of his first wife, a blot on Victoria's perfectly orchestrated life. Cassandra, following her mother's lead, treated me like the help. She'd snap her fingers when she wanted something, dump her laundry on my bed expecting me to wash it, and once even submitted my English essay as her own, knowing I couldn't prove it without looking petty. Bianca was worse in her own way. She'd pretend to be friendly when others were watching, then whisper poison when we were alone. "You know nobody actually wants you here, right?" she said on my 16th birthday, after my father forgot it entirely because Victoria had planned a spa day for her and the girls. "You're like a sad little barnacle clinging to our family. It's actually pathetic." I spent most of my teenage years in my room, a converted attic space that Victoria had graciously given me when she redecorated the house. It was hot in summer, freezing in winter, and the slanted ceiling meant I hit my head at least once a week. But it was mine, and more importantly, it was away from them. I had my books, my second-hand laptop, and a view of the river that reminded me there was a world beyond those walls. The only person who ever saw me, really saw me, was Martha, our housekeeper. She'd worked for my father since before he met my mother, and she remembered what the house had been like when love lived there instead of ambition. "Your mother would be so proud of you," she'd whisper when she brought me dinner on the nights I wasn't welcome at the family table. "You have her strength, her grace. Don't let them take that from you." But strength and grace don't pay for college when your father's wife convinces him that Cassandra and Bianca need their tuition fully covered while you should learn the value of hard work through student loans. They don't buy you a car when your stepsisters each get BMWs for their 16th birthdays, while you get a lecture about not being materialistic. They don't earn you a seat at the table when your father's will is being read and everyone's trying not to look too eager about their inheritance. The morning my father died, I was at my job, a coffee shop near Columbia, where I was finishing my master's degree in art history. Victoria had convinced my father that graduate school was an indulgence, so I was paying for it myself, working 40 hours a week while maintaining a 3.9 GPA. My phone rang just as the morning rush was ending. It was Cassandra, and she sounded annoyed more than grieved. "Father's dead," she said, as casually as if announcing rain. "Heart attack this morning. The funeral's Thursday. Try to find something appropriate to wear." She hung up before I could respond, before I could process that the man who'd given me life but never quite managed to give me love was gone. I stood there holding a dirty espresso portafilter, feeling nothing and everything all at once. A customer asked if I was okay, and I heard myself say yes, because what else was there to say? That I'd just lost a father who'd been lost to me for years? That I was grieving a relationship that never existed outside my desperate wishes? I asked my manager for the week off and took the train back to the house I'd grown up in, but never called home. Victoria was in full performance mode, playing the grieving widow to perfection. She'd already called the Times for the obituary, arranged for the most expensive funeral package available, and somehow found time to buy herself a new black Chanel suit that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. "Oh, Sophia," she said when she saw me, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "How wonderful that you could make it. I know how busy you are with your little job." Cassandra and Bianca flanked her like matching bookends, both in designer black, both wearing expressions of practiced sorrow that would disappear the moment no one important was looking. Bianca actually checked her phone while the rabbi was speaking at the service, and I saw Cassandra smile when she thought no one was watching. They weren't mourning a father, they were anticipating a payday. The will reading was scheduled for the Monday after the funeral, in the offices of Cromwell, Ashford, and Associates, my father's law firm for the past 20 years. I almost didn't go. What was the point? Victoria had been managing my father's accounts for years, slowly moving assets into trusts for her daughters, convincing him to update his will every time I disappointed him by existing. I knew how this would end, but Martha convinced me. She'd been let go the day after the funeral, Victoria's first act as the sole authority in the house. "You go, child," Martha said, pressing my hand as she packed her things. "Your father wasn't perfect, but he loved you in his way. Don't let them erase you completely." So I went. I sat in that office in my only black dress, a clearance rack find that Victoria once said made me look like I was cosplaying as someone with class, and watched my life get parceled out to people who hated me. The lawyer, Mr. Cromwell, was an older man with kind eyes who seemed uncomfortable with what he was about to do. He cleared his throat several times before beginning, adjusting his glasses as if hoping the words might change if he looked at them differently. "The estate of Richard Winters, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeaths the following." He paused, glancing at me with something like pity. "To my beloved wife, Victoria Winters, I leave our primary residence, all its contents, and a trust fund of $2 million to maintain her lifestyle." Victoria nodded as if this was simply her due, though I saw her fingers tighten on her Hermes bag. She'd expected more. "To my daughter Cassandra Winters, I leave my shares in the Winters Hospitality Group, valued at approximately $7 million, as well as the house in the Hamptons and the associated property." Cassandra's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. She'd been angling for control of the company for years, playing my father like a violin with her MBA and her strategic tears. To my daughter, Bianca Winters, I leave my investment portfolio, valued at approximately $8 million, the yacht Victoria's Dream, and my collection of contemporary art. Bianca actually laughed, a bright, tinkling sound that made my stomach turn. $8 million for a girl who'd never worked a day in her life, who'd spent her 23 years perfecting the art of being decorative. Mr. Cromwell paused again, longer this time. The office was so quiet I could hear the traffic 20 floors below. To my daughter, Sophia Winters. I held my breath. Even knowing it would be nothing, even preparing for the worst, some stupid, stubborn part of me hoped. Maybe he'd remembered one birthday, one Christmas morning when I'd made him laugh, one moment when he'd seen me as more than Victoria's mistake to manage. I leave the snow globe from my office desk, which she always admired as a child. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Bianca snorted. Cassandra covered her mouth, but her shoulders shook with suppressed laughter. Victoria didn't even bother hiding her satisfaction, her lips curving in a smile that made her look like a snake about to swallow a mouse. Mr. Cromwell looked mortified. He reached under his desk and pulled out a small box, which he handed to me with hands that seemed to shake slightly. I'm very sorry, Miss Winters. This was the specific bequest. I opened the box with numb fingers. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper like it was something precious instead of a joke, was the snow globe. I remembered it vaguely, a cheap souvenir from some business trip, sitting on a shelf behind my father's desk, gathering dust. The plastic cottage inside was painted garishly. The snow was just white plastic chips, and the whole thing probably cost less than $5 at some airport gift shop. "That's it?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "That's all?" Mr. Cromwell nodded, looking anywhere but at my face. "There is one additional note. Your father wrote, 'She knows why.'" I didn't know why. I had no idea why. All I knew was that I was holding a piece of plastic trash while my step-family divided up $15 million and a lifetime of my father's work. "Well," Victoria said, standing with imperious grace, "I suppose that concludes things. Sophia, you'll need to have your belongings out of the house by the end of the week. We're renovating your little attic space into a yoga studio." They left me there, in that office, holding my pathetic inheritance, while Mr. Cromwell awkwardly offered me tissues I didn't need because I wasn't crying. I couldn't cry. I was too stunned, too hollowed out by the final proof that I had never mattered at all. I took the subway back to my apartment, a studio in Washington Heights I shared with 2 roommates, and a suspicious smell that might have been mold or might have been the restaurant downstairs. I sat on my narrow bed, holding the snow globe, trying to understand. She knows why. But I didn't. I turned it over, looking for some message, some sign that this was more than just one last humiliation. The base was plain black plastic, slightly warped. The globe itself was cloudy, like it had been handled too much or left in the sun. When I shook it, the snow swirled half-heartedly before settling in clumps. I wanted to throw it against the wall. I wanted to watch it shatter into 1,000 pieces, like my stupid, persistent hope that somewhere, deep down, my father had loved me. But I couldn't. It was all I had left of him, even if it was nothing. My roommate, Jessica, found me there an hour later, still holding it. "Rough day?" she asked, then saw my face. "Okay, rough year. Want to talk about it?" I told her everything. About the will, about the $15 million I'd watched disappear into my stepfamily's pockets, about the snow globe that was supposed to mean something but didn't. Jessica examined it with the critical eye of someone who'd spent 3 years in art school before switching to nursing. "This is really cheap," she said, which wasn't helpful. Like dollar store cheap. The kind of thing you buy because you forgot to get a souvenir and you're already at the airport. "Thanks, I figured that out." She shook it, watching the snow swirl. Although, wait. She held it up to the light, squinting. There's something weird about the cottage. Look, see how it's not centered, and the way it's weighted at the bottom? I took it back, looking closer. She was right. The little cottage inside wasn't sitting flat on the base. It was tilted, like it had come loose, and now that she mentioned it, it did seem oddly heavy on one side. Maybe it's broken, I said. Would fit with everything else about this inheritance. But something nagged at me. My father had been many things: distant, distracted, disappointingly weak when it came to Victoria, but he'd never been cruel without purpose. Even his neglect had been passive, not active. This felt deliberate. The specificity of it, the note that I knew why when I clearly didn't. I spent the rest of the evening staring at that stupid snow globe, shaking it over and over, watching the cottage wobble inside its plastic prison. It was past midnight when frustration finally won. I grabbed the globe with both hands and shook it violently, the kind of shake that would have gotten me sent to my room as a child for being destructive and ungrateful, as Victoria would say. That's when I heard it. A small clicking sound, like metal on plastic. I froze, then shook it again, gentler this time. Click, click. There was something inside the cottage, something that moved independently of the structure itself. My hands trembled as I examined the globe more carefully. The base wasn't solid plastic like I'd thought. There was a seam, painted over but visible if you knew where to look. I got a butter knife from the kitchen and carefully pried at it, terrified I'd break the only thing my father had left me, even if it was worthless. The base popped open with a soft crack, and there, taped to the inside, was a small brass key. My heart hammered as I pulled it free. It was old-fashioned, ornate, the kind of key that belonged to something important, something that mattered. Wrapped around it was a tiny piece of paper, rolled so tight I had to use tweezers to unfurl it. In my father's handwriting, cramped but clear, were 3 words: "Trust no one." And below that, numbers 1847. I stared at the key and the cryptic message, my mind racing. 1847 wasn't a year that meant anything to me. It wasn't a birthday, an anniversary, an address I recognized. But it had to mean something. My father had hidden this key deliberately, had made sure only I would get it, had trusted that I would figure it out. Trust no one. The words sent chills down my spine. Who was he warning me against? Victoria? The lawyers? Someone else entirely? I barely slept that night, turning the key over in my fingers, trying to decode the message. When morning came, I called in sick to work and started searching. I went through every document I had from my father, every birthday card he'd managed to sign, every receipt or note I'd kept out of pathetic sentiment. Nothing connected to 1847. It was Jessica who solved it, accidentally, while complaining about her own family drama over breakfast. "At least your dad left you a mystery," she said, spreading peanut butter on toast. "My dad just left debt and a storage unit full of garbage that costs me $1,800 a month to maintain because my mom's convinced there's something valuable in there." Storage unit. The number wasn't a date. It was a unit number. My father had a storage facility, Secure Vault, down by the Navy Yard. He'd mentioned it once, years ago, something about keeping old business records there. Victoria had rolled her eyes, calling it another one of Richard's paranoid habits. I was on the subway within an hour, the key burning in my pocket. The facility was one of those places that prided itself on discretion, no questions asked, payment in advance, total privacy for whatever you needed to hide from the world. The desk attendant, a bored-looking guy playing solitaire on his phone, barely glanced at me. "Unit number?" 1847. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He typed something into his computer, frowned, typed again. "That's one of our premium units. Climate-controlled, high security. Says here it's been paid up for, 20 years in advance. You got the key?" I showed him the brass key. He nodded, handed me a visitor's badge, and pointed toward the elevator. 18th floor, Unit 47. You need anything, there's a call button by the elevator." The ride up felt endless. 18 floors of not knowing what I'd find, of wondering if this was all some elaborate joke or if my father had actually left me something that mattered. The hallway was silent, fluorescent lights humming overhead, identical doors stretching in both directions. Unit 1847 was at the far end, distinguished only by its number and a secondary electronic lock that accepted the brass key. The door opened with a soft hiss, lights automatically flickering on to reveal. I actually gasped. The unit was huge, at least 500 square feet, and every inch was filled. File cabinets lined one wall, each labeled with dates going back 30 years. Boxes stacked to the ceiling contained what looked like documents, photographs, hard drives. But what stopped me in my tracks was the wall of safety deposit boxes built into the far side, each with its own lock, and the massive safe that dominated the center of the room. On a desk near the entrance was an envelope with my name on it. My real name, not Sophia Winters, but Sophia Marie Chen Winters, using my mother's maiden name that I'd never heard spoken in my father's house after Victoria arrived. I opened it with shaking hands. "My dearest Sophie," it began, and I had to sit down because he hadn't called me that in 15 years. "If you're reading this, then you found the key, which means you're smarter than Victoria ever gave you credit for. But then, you always were. I know I failed you. I know I let Victoria and her daughters treat you like you didn't matter, and I will carry that shame to my grave. But I need you to understand, it was the only way to protect you. Victoria is not who she appears to be. When I married her, I was lonely, and she was beautiful and charming and seemed to adore you. It wasn't until after the wedding that I discovered the truth. Her first husband didn't die in a car accident. She orchestrated it for the insurance money. She's been slowly poisoning me for the past 2 years, just enough to weaken my heart, to make a heart attack seem inevitable. I have proof, but no one would believe me over her. She's too careful, too smart, too connected. Everything in this room is evidence, not just of her crimes, but of what really belongs to you. Your mother's family, the Chens, weren't poor immigrants like I let you believe. They owned half of Chinatown in the 1960s, built a real estate empire that your grandfather converted into cash and gold before the market crash of 1987. Your mother was the sole heir. When she died, it should have all gone to you, but I was young and stupid and let Victoria convince me to hide it for your own good. The safe combination is your mother's birthday, year 31584. Inside, you'll find the real will, the one Victoria doesn't know exists, properly notarized and witnessed. You'll also find your mother's trust documents, the bonds, the gold certificates, and the deeds to properties Victoria doesn't know about. The safety deposit boxes contain evidence of Victoria's crimes, not just against her first husband and me, but fraud, embezzlement from the company, bribes to judges to ensure she'd get custody if anything happened to me. There's enough there to put her away for life. But Sophie, you must be careful. She's dangerous when cornered. Take everything to David Kim. His card is in the safe. He's the only lawyer I trust, the only one she hasn't bought. He's been waiting for your call. I'm sorry I couldn't be the father you deserved. I'm sorry I was too weak to stand up to her, too afraid of what she might do to you if I tried. But I never stopped loving you. Every cruel word I let her speak, every birthday I let her make me forget, every moment I failed to protect you, I documented it all. Not for legal reasons, but because I needed you to know that I saw it. I saw you. I saw your strength, your grace, your mother's spirit living on in you. The snow globe was your mother's. She bought it on our honeymoon. Yes, it's cheap, she laughed about that. She said it reminded her that happiness doesn't have to be expensive, just real. I kept it to remember what real love looked like. I'm giving it to you because you're the only real thing in my life that mattered. Don't let them break you, my darling girl. You're worth more than all of them combined, and now you have the proof. All my love, Dad. I sat on the floor of that storage unit and cried for the first time since he died. Not pretty tears, but ugly, body-shaking sobs that left me gasping. He had seen me. He had loved me, and in his own broken, imperfect way, he had protected me. It took me 3 hours to go through everything. The safe alone contained more wealth than I could process. Bonds worth millions, gold certificates, deeds to buildings in Chinatown that were now worth fortunes, documentation of offshore accounts in my mother's name that had been accumulating interest for 25 years. Conservative estimate? $40 million? Maybe more. But it was the evidence against Victoria that made my blood run cold. Photos of her with her first husband days before his death, showing bruises on his arms, medical records she'd falsified, forged signatures on documents transferring company assets to shell corporations she controlled. A recording, God, my father had recorded her, admitting to slowly poisoning him, laughing about how easy it was to make everyone believe he was just getting old. He actually thinks I care about him. Her voice crackled through the old tape player. Richard's so pathetic, so desperate for affection, a little digitalis in his coffee every morning, and everyone just thinks it's stress. By next year, I'll be a wealthy widow, and that little brat of his won't get a penny. There was more. So much more. Evidence that Cassandra had been embezzling from the company for years, that Bianca had been selling family information to competitors. They were all in on it, all part of Victoria's web of greed and cruelty. I called David Kim from the storage unit. He answered on the second ring, as if he'd been waiting. "Miss Chen Winters?" His voice was warm, paternal. "I've been hoping to hear from you. You know who I am? I've known since you were born. Your father and I went to law school together. I helped him set up this contingency plan 5 years ago when he first suspected Victoria was poisoning him. Do you have everything?" "I have it all." "Good. Can you meet me in my office in an hour? We need to move fast. Victoria's already trying to liquidate assets that aren't legally hers." I spent the next hour photographing everything, uploading it to multiple cloud servers, sending copies to David Kim's secure email. I wasn't taking any chances. Victoria had killed at least one person, maybe two if my father's heart attack wasn't entirely natural. I wouldn't be the third. David Kim's office was in a building that screamed old money and discretion. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the sort of calm that came from knowing the law was on your side. "Your father was a good man who got lost," he said after reviewing everything. "Victoria is very skilled at manipulation. She isolated him from his real friends, made him dependent on her approval, classic abuse tactics. But he never forgot you. Every time he came here, he talked about you. How smart you were, how strong, how much like your mother." "What do we do now?" "Now we destroy them," he said simply. "Legally speaking, of course. The will Victoria had read was drafted under duress, and after he'd been systematically poisoned, we can prove diminished capacity. The real will, the one in the safe, predates his marriage to Victoria and includes provisions that supersede any later documents. Everything goes to you. The company, the houses, the money, all of it." "What about the criminal charges?" "I've already called a friend at the district attorney's office. With this evidence, Victoria and her daughters will be arrested within the week. The recorded confession alone is enough for attempted murder. The financial crimes just add years to their sentences." It felt surreal. This morning I'd been a disinherited nobody with a cheap snow globe. Now I was about to become one of the wealthiest women in New York and the key witness in a murder trial. "There's one more thing," David said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Your mother's family, the Chens. They've been looking for you for years. Victoria intercepted their letters, blocked their calls. Your grandmother is still alive, Sophie. She's 91 and living in San Francisco. She never stopped hoping she'd meet you." The photograph in the folder showed an elderly Chinese woman with my eyes, my smile, standing in front of a house that looked like a palace. Behind her were cousins, aunts, uncles, a whole family I'd never known existed. "They've kept your mother's room exactly as she left it," David continued. "Your grandmother says you can visit any time. They want to know you." I was crying again, but this time from joy. I had a family, a real family who wanted me, who'd been looking for me. "We should move fast on filing these documents," David said gently. Victoria will realize something's wrong soon. She's smart enough to know that your father wouldn't have left you nothing without a reason. We need to strike before she figures it out. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of legal filings, meetings with prosecutors, and security preparations. David insisted I stay in a hotel under an assumed name, with a bodyguard he trusted. It seemed excessive until we learned Victoria had hired a private investigator to follow me. The arrests happened on a Thursday morning. I watched from David's office as the news broke. "Socialite arrested for murder, fraud," scrolled across the bottom of the screen as footage showed Victoria being led out of the mansion in handcuffs, her perfect composure finally cracking as she screamed about frame jobs and conspiracies. Cassandra was arrested at the company headquarters, pulled out of a board meeting in front of dozens of employees. Bianca they found at a spa, getting a facial with money she'd stolen from the company. The snow globe sat on David's desk as we watched, its cheap plastic cottage somehow looking less pathetic now that I knew its story. "Your father would be proud," David said. "You did what he couldn't. You stood up to them." The trials were swift. Victoria's recorded confession, combined with the medical evidence and financial records, made conviction inevitable. She got 25 to life for murder and attempted murder. Cassandra got 15 years for embezzlement and fraud. Bianca, who broke down and testified against her mother and sister, got 5 years with possibility of parole in 3. I attended every day of the trials, sitting in the front row where they couldn't avoid seeing me. Victoria tried to maintain her imperious facade, but I saw it crack when the prosecutor played the recording of her laughing about poisoning my father. Cassandra cried when the judge read the sentence, mascara streaming down her face as she finally realized her MBA wouldn't help her in federal prison. Bianca just looked small and lost, like a child who'd finally understood that actions have consequences. On the last day, as Victoria was being led away, she turned to look at me. For a moment, the mask dropped entirely, and I saw what she really was, not a sophisticated socialite or a clever manipulator, but a desperate, grasping woman who destroyed everything she touched in her hunger for more. "You think you've won!" she hissed. "No," I said, my voice carrying across the courtroom. "I just survived you. That's enough." The company board, freed from Cassandra's toxic influence and grateful to avoid further scandal, voted unanimously to honor my father's true will. I inherited everything: the houses, the money, the business, $43 million in total, plus properties and investments that would generate millions more. My first act as the new owner was to rehire Martha as head of household staff, with a salary that would let her retire comfortably whenever she chose. She cried when I called her, then showed up the next day with a cake she'd baked and stories about my mother I'd never heard. She would be so proud, Martha said, hugging me in the kitchen of the mansion that now felt like it might someday be home. "You have her spine, her sense of justice, but you also have something she didn't. You survived to see justice done." I sold the Hamptons house. Too many memories of being excluded from family vacations there. The yacht went too, renamed Karma's Prize by its new owner, who'd heard the story and found it fitting. The contemporary art collection, which turned out to be mostly forgeries Bianca had been too ignorant to recognize, I donated to a museum for authentication and study. But the mansion by the Hudson, I kept. Not because I loved it, but because I needed to reclaim it. I turned Victoria's yoga studio back into my old attic room, but this time with proper heating, cooling, and windows that actually opened. I made it a library, filling it with first editions and rare books, the kind of collection my father would have loved if he'd ever taken time to read. The real revelation came when I finally met my mother's family. I flew to San Francisco 2 months after the trials ended, my hands shaking as the taxi pulled up to a Victorian mansion in Pacific Heights. My grandmother, despite being 91, stood at the door waiting for me. The moment she saw me, she started crying, speaking rapid Mandarin. I didn't understand, but somehow felt in my bones. "You look just like her," she said in English, cupping my face in her weathered hands. just like my Lily. The Chens welcomed me like I'd never been gone, like the 28 years of separation were just a blink. They showed me photos of my mother I'd never seen, told me stories about her childhood, her dreams, how she'd fallen in love with my father when he was just a struggling law student with big dreams and a food truck. She saw his heart, my grandmother said. Saw that he was good, just weak sometimes. She would understand what happened. She would forgive him. And somehow, surrounded by family who actually wanted me there, looking at pictures of a mother who would have fought for me, I forgave him too. I used part of my inheritance to establish the Lily Chen Winters Foundation, dedicated to helping young women escape abusive family situations. The first recipient was a girl named Amy, whose stepmother had been slowly stealing her college fund while convincing her father she was troubled and ungrateful. We got her out, got her into Columbia, and last I heard, she was graduating summa cum laude. The foundation grew faster than I expected. Turns out, there are a lot of Sophias out there, overlooked, undervalued, told they're worth less than the people around them. We've helped dozens of young women find their voices, their strength, their way out of situations designed to break them. I kept the snow globe. It sits on my desk in the office where I run my father's company, my company now. Sometimes, when I'm making difficult decisions or feeling overwhelmed, I shake it and watch the snow swirl around that cheap plastic cottage. It reminds me that value isn't always obvious, that the smallest things can hold the biggest secrets, that sometimes what looks like nothing is actually everything. Victoria was wrong about one thing. I didn't win. Winning implies there was a game, a competition, something to be gained by crushing others. What I did was simpler and harder. I survived. I endured. And when the moment came, when that tiny key clicked in that lock, I was ready to claim what had always been mine. The last time I visited Victoria in prison, she looked older, grayer, diminished in her orange jumpsuit. She asked me for money for her commissary account. The woman who'd stolen millions, who'd murdered for wealth, was begging me for $20 to buy decent shampoo. I put $50 in her account, not out of forgiveness or sympathy, but because I could. Because every dollar I gave her was a reminder that I controlled her fate now, that the girl she'd dismissed as nothing was the only reason she could afford deodorant. Why? She asked, genuine confusion in her voice. Because my mother would have, I said. Because despite everything you did to erase her, to erase me, we're still here. Our kindness, our strength, our refusal to become you, that's still here. She had nothing to say to that. For once in her life, Victoria Winters was speechless. I walked out of that prison into bright sunshine, got into my car, nothing flashy, just reliable and mine, and drove home to the mansion by the Hudson. Martha had dinner waiting, my grandmother was visiting from San Francisco, and 3 young women from the foundation were coming to discuss their college applications. The house that had once echoed with my loneliness now rang with laughter, with languages I was learning to speak, with the voices of people who actually wanted to be there. My father's office, where that snow globe had sat gathering dust for so many years, was now my study, where I was finally finishing my doctorate in art history, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. That night, as my grandmother taught me to make my mother's favorite dumplings, she asked me if I was happy. I thought about it, really thought about it. I had more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. I had a family who loved me, a purpose that mattered, a future that was entirely my own to shape. But more than that, I had something Victoria and her daughters never understood, something my father lost sight of until it was too late. I had enough. Yes, I said, and meant it. I'm happy. My grandmother smiled, her eyes crinkling with the kind of joy that comes from seeing wounds heal, from watching someone you love come home to themselves. Your mother would be proud, she said in Mandarin, and this time I understood. The snow globe caught the light from the kitchen window, sending tiny rainbows across the wall. Inside, the plastic cottage sat crooked and cheap and perfect, surrounded by swirling snow that would never settle quite right. It was ugly and beautiful, worthless and priceless, nothing and everything, just like me. Just like all of us who've been told we don't matter, only to discover we were the only things that did. The Winters Hospitality Group is thriving now, refocused on ethical practices and fair wages that would have horrified Victoria. We've opened 3 new restaurants, all featuring fusion cuisine that honors both my parents' heritage. The flagship restaurant, Lily's Table, serves my mother's dumplings alongside my father's favorite sandwiches from his food truck days. Critics call it ambitious comfort food, which feels right. Cassandra writes me letters from prison sometimes, asking for forgiveness, for money, for a job when she gets out. I don't respond, but I keep the letters. They remind me what happens when you mistake cruelty for strength, when you build your life on the destruction of others. Bianca got out last month. She sent me a single text. "I'm sorry." I didn't respond to that either, but I heard from Martha that she's working at a nonprofit now, teaching art to underprivileged kids. Maybe prison taught her something Victoria never could, that there's more to life than taking from others. Sometimes I drive past the storage unit where I found my inheritance. They've upgraded the security system, added cameras and biometric locks. The manager told me my unit has become something of a legend there, the secret treasure room that changed everything. I still rent it, though it's empty now except for one thing: a photo of my parents on their wedding day. My mother laughing as my father spins her around, both of them so young and full of hope. I've learned to speak Mandarin fluently now, surprising my grandmother and delighting the Chen family. They're teaching me about our history, about the great-grandparents who came to America with nothing and built an empire through sheer determination and strategic brilliance. It turns out I come from a long line of survivors, of people who refuse to be erased. Last week, a young woman came to the foundation. She was 22, working 3 jobs to pay for community college, while her step-family lived off her late father's insurance money. They'd convinced her she was lucky they let her sleep in the garage. She reminded me so much of myself that it hurt. I handed her a snow globe, not the one my father left me, but one I'd bought specially for moments like this. Inside was a tiny golden key instead of a cottage. Sometimes, I told her, the smallest things unlock the biggest doors. You just have to be brave enough to shake things up and see what falls out. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much, that had been told too often that she was nothing. But underneath the hurt, I saw something else, that spark of defiance that refuses to be extinguished, that whisper of hope that says maybe, just maybe, there's more to the story. There always is. My father was right about one thing in his letter. I am my mother's daughter. But I'm also his daughter, the girl who learned to survive in a house full of enemies, who found strength in silence and power in patience. I'm Victoria's worst nightmare and my grandmother's answered prayer. I'm the ghost who became flesh, the footnote who rewrote the story, the cheap snow globe that turned out to be the key to everything. The foundation has helped over 100 young women now. Some days, I sit in my office and read their success stories, law school acceptances, business launches, art exhibitions, medical degrees. Each one is a small revolution, a quiet overthrow of someone who tried to keep them down. Martha retired last year, but she still comes by for tea every Wednesday. She's writing a cookbook now, all the recipes she cooked for my father's restaurants over the years, but also the secret ones, the meals she made for me when I was banished from the family table, the comfort foods that kept me going when everything else felt hopeless. She's calling it the Kitchen Table Revolution, Recipes for the Uninvited. I've already pre-ordered 100 copies for the foundation. My grandmother passed away 6 months ago, peacefully in her sleep. She left me her wedding ring and a letter written in Mandarin that translated to, "You were worth the wait." At her funeral, hundreds of people came to pay their respects, and for the first time in my life, when people asked who I was, I could say, "I'm her granddaughter," without having to explain why they'd never heard of me before. The Chen family has embraced me completely. My cousins joke that I'm making up for lost time by being the overachiever of the generation. One of them, David, has joined me in running the company. He has his MBA from Wharton and a wicked sense of humor about our soap opera origin story, as he calls it. "Most people just inherit money," he said during our last board meeting. "You inherited a Netflix series worth of drama." He's not wrong. A production company actually approached me about making a film about what happened. I turned them down. Some stories are too personal to sell, too important to reduce to entertainment. Besides, the young women who come to the foundation need to know this isn't just a story, it's a possibility. It's proof that the plot can twist in your favor even when everyone else thinks your chapter is over. I've been dating someone for the past year. His name is James, and he's a teacher at an inner-city school. He makes me laugh, doesn't care about my money, and when I told him the whole story, his first response was, "Your dad hid $40 million in a storage unit? That's the most extra thing I've ever heard." He keeps me grounded, reminds me that happiness doesn't require elaborate schemes or hidden keys. Sometimes it's just someone who sees you for who you really are and thinks that's enough. The mansion by the Hudson has been transformed. What was once a monument to Victoria's cold perfection is now alive with warmth. I host dinners for the foundation recipients, game nights for the Chen cousins, holiday parties for the company employees. The room where Victoria used to hold court, making everyone feel small, is now where we celebrate each other's victories, no matter how small. I kept my father's office exactly as it was, except for one thing. Next to the snow globe on the desk, I placed a photo from my college graduation, the one he missed because Victoria had planned a cruise. In it, I'm smiling despite everything, holding my diploma like a shield against the world. It reminds me that I was strong before I was rich, that I had worth before I had proof, that I mattered even when no one else seemed to notice. Sometimes young women from the foundation ask me how I survived all those years of being invisible, of being told I was nothing. I tell them the truth, I almost didn't. There were nights I wondered if Victoria was right, if I really was just a burden, a mistake, a footnote in someone else's story. But then I'd remember Martha sneaking me dinner, or my one friend in high school who invited me to her house for holidays, or the professor who told me my thesis was brilliant. These tiny acts of kindness were breadcrumbs leading me out of the forest, proof that Victoria's version of reality wasn't the only one. I tell them that survival isn't about being strong all the time. It's about being strong enough, just enough to make it to tomorrow, and then the next tomorrow, and the next. Until one day you shake a snow globe and find a key, or get a phone call that changes everything, or realize that the people who tried to diminish you were the ones who were truly small. The company is worth almost double what it was when I inherited it. We've expanded internationally, opened a culinary school for disadvantaged youth, started a program that gives formerly incarcerated individuals a second chance in our kitchens. Every success feels like a small rebellion against Victoria's vision of what the company should be: exclusive, elite, cruel. Last month, we opened a restaurant in Chinatown, in one of the buildings my mother's family owned decades ago. My grandmother had sold it when my mother died, unable to bear the memories. I bought it back and restored it to what it had been, not just a restaurant, but a community center, a place where immigrants could find resources, support, connections. The grand opening was on what would have been my mother's 50th birthday. That night, as I stood in the space my mother's family had built, surrounded by my father's legacy transformed into something worthy, I felt them both. Not as ghosts or memories, but as parts of me, my mother's strength and my father's ambition, finally working together instead of being torn apart by Victoria's poison. The snow globe sits in a place of honor now, in a custom case that makes it look like the treasure it is. Visitors to my office often ask about it, confused by its obvious cheapness surrounded by actual valuable art. I tell them it's worth more than everything else in the room combined. They usually think I'm being metaphorical. They're usually wrong. Victoria will be eligible for parole in 15 years. She'll be 73, all her beauty faded, all her schemes exhausted. I've already decided that if she gets out, I'll give her a job at one of the restaurants. Not out of forgiveness, but because I want her to see what we've built on the foundation of her cruelty. I want her to serve food to happy families, to watch people celebrate love and success, to understand finally that power isn't about making others feel small, it's about helping them grow tall enough to cast their own shadows. Cassandra has 5 more years. Her letters have stopped coming, which is a relief. I heard from her former cellmate that she's studying law in prison, planning to help other women with their appeals. Maybe she's learning what her MBA never taught her, that real success comes from lifting others up, not stepping on them. Bianca sent me a painting last week. It was a snow globe, painted in oils so realistic I could almost see the snow swirling. Inside the globe, instead of a cottage, was a girl made of gold, finally free. I hung it in the foundation office, where the young women can see it and understand. We are all more valuable than we appear, all carrying treasures others can't see. The private investigator Victoria hired all those years ago came forward last year. He'd been bothered by what he'd seen, he said, the way Victoria talked about me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person. He'd kept copies of everything, thinking someday it might matter. His testimony helped convict Victoria's lawyer, who'd been helping her hide assets. Sometimes conscience takes its time, but it usually arrives. I've learned to forgive my father, not all at once, but in pieces. I forgive the man who hid $40 million to protect me. I forgive the father who kept that snow globe as a reminder of real love. I forgive the husband who was too weak to stand up to his wife, but strong enough to plan for justice from beyond the grave. I don't forgive the years of silence, the birthdays forgotten, the graduations missed. But I understand them now. Fear makes cowards of us all, and Victoria was very good at making people afraid. The foundation is expanding nationally now. We've partnered with law firms, social services, universities, creating a network that catches young women before they fall through the cracks. Every success story is a small victory against everyone who ever made a girl feel worthless. We're building an army of snow globe shakers, key finders, truth tellers. Sometimes I dream about that day in the lawyer's office, holding that cheap plastic globe while my step-family counted their millions. In the dream, I shake it immediately, right there in front of them. The key falls out, along with diamonds, gold coins, legal documents, all spilling onto that mahogany table while their faces twist in horror. I wake up laughing every time. The truth is better than any dream. The truth is that I walked out of that office with what looked like nothing and turned it into everything. The truth is that Victoria's cruelty made me strong enough to survive her downfall. The truth is that my father loved me enough to play a long game that would ensure justice even if he couldn't deliver it himself. Next month, I'm endowing a scholarship at Columbia in my mother's name, full tuition for young women studying art history, priority given to those who've overcome family trauma. The dean asked if I wanted to name a building after her. I said no. Buildings are what Victoria cared about. My mother would want her name on chances, on possibilities, on futures that haven't been written yet. I still shake the snow globe sometimes, even though the key is long gone, even though I know exactly what's inside. There's something meditative about watching the snow swirl and settle, about holding this cheap thing that changed everything. It reminds me that revolutions don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they hide in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to shake things up. The cottage inside has come completely loose now, floating free in its plastic world. I like it better this way, unmoored, unlimited, refusing to stay where it was placed. Just like me, just like all of us who were supposed to accept our place in someone else's story, but decided to write our own instead. Yesterday, a girl came to the foundation. 16 years old, sleeping in her car because her stepmother had convinced her father she was troubled and dangerous after. She reported her stepbrother's abuse. She had nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and a determination that reminded me of myself at that age. Fragile but unbroken, bent but not defeated. I gave her more than money, more than resources, more than a safe place to stay. I gave her what Martha gave me all those years ago, the radical act of being seen. I looked her in the eyes and said, "You matter. Your story matters, and this isn't how it ends." She cried. I held her while she sobbed out years of being told she was nothing, and I thought about how many of us there are, the forgotten daughters, the erased children, the ones who are supposed to disappear quietly while others take what's ours. We're an invisible army, but we're getting louder, getting stronger, getting harder to ignore. Victoria thought she had written the perfect crime, the perfect life, the perfect story where she was the heroine and I was barely a footnote. She thought she could erase my mother, diminish my father, and delete me entirely. She thought $15 million and a cheap snow globe was the end of the story. She was wrong about everything except one thing. I did get the snow globe, and that, it turns out, was all I needed. The snow has settled in the globe now, piled in drifts around the free-floating cottage, but I know that with just one shake, it will all swirl again, creating new patterns, new possibilities, new ways of seeing what was always there. That's what truth does. It doesn't create anything new. It just reveals what was hidden. My father's letter is framed in my bedroom, not the office. It's the last thing I see at night, the first thing I see in the morning. Don't let them break you, my darling girl. Every day I don't. Every day I help other girls not break either. Every day we shake our snow globes and find our keys and unlock doors that were supposed to stay closed forever. This is what victory looks like. Not crushing your enemies, but outliving their relevance. Not inheriting millions, but understanding your worth was never measured in money. Not getting revenge, but getting free. The cottage in the snow globe spins slowly in its liquid world, untethered and unafraid. Sometimes I think it looks like it's dancing. Sometimes I think it looks like it's flying. Always, it looks like it's exactly where it's supposed to be. Not settled, not stable, but free. Just like me. Just like all of us who were told we were nothing and discovered we were everything. Just like every girl who's been handed a cheap snow globe and told that's all she's worth, not knowing she's holding the key to the kingdom. Shake it and see.